I've got Sir Keir Starmer's so-called surrender deal right here in my hands. What I'm going to read to you is going to shock you to your core. To give you some backstory first, the government has now handed over some of our most vital military islands, the Chagos archipelago, to Mauritius, a state cosy to China. And we, me and you, the taxpayers, are of course footing the bill. Announcing the deal at a press conference earlier today, the Prime Minister claimed he had no choice but to sign it.
Now, other approaches to secure the base have been tried over the years, and they have failed. Boris Johnson failed in his efforts to endlessly delay. Liz Truss then started the negotiations. We inherited a negotiation in which the principle of giving up UK sovereignty had already been conceded by the previous Tory government. Our deal has concluded those negotiations in the national interest.
200 islands commanding 600,000 square kilometres of sea, a region critical to our shared Western military presence in the Indian Ocean. Here's the first slap in the face. We will pay £101 million a year for the next 100 years for that privilege. That's £10 billion. The biggest slap in the face, of course, comes a lot more because, I tell you what, the government are dubbing this reparations. Many critics will argue. Payments to Mauritius, a country that Starmer and his leftist lawyer friends have been wined and dined in. He sent Defence Secretary John Healey out to defend his deal this afternoon.
Simple truth, Mr. Speaker, is that our national security rests on securing a deal that protects our operational sovereignty of this vital military installation. By signing this treaty on our terms, the Prime Minister has ensured that the UK retains full control of Diego Garcia throughout the next century and beyond. It is a deal struck in the national interest. It is a deal that makes Britons today and generations to come safer and more secure.
Like, if you thought the cost was bad enough, wait till you hear the next bit. Our government has agreed, and I quote directly from that paperwork, that the United Kingdom agrees to expeditiously inform Mauritius of any armed attack on a third state directly emanating from the base on Diego Garcia. Have they lost their minds? One of China's closest allies will now be giving them a heads up on our military actions. But what was this all really about? Well, a close inspection of the documentation, and I can tell you immediately where this all started. As stipulated in the documents, we, Britain, must recognise the wrongs of the past and be mindful of the need to complete the process of decolonisation of Mauritius. How can we decolonise Mauritius when the islands never belonged to them in the first place? Early this morning, there was a flicker of hope. Two extraordinary, courageous Chagossian women filed a legal injunction to stop this sellout. One of them, Ms. Pomp, called the deal a betrayal of their rights.
Well, I think British justice, they take care of who they want, when they want. They haven't been able to rectify the wrongs they have done to us, the Chagossians, for 60 years. They still want to give a deaf ears to our cries, and we're not giving up.
For all their posturing about human rights, this government couldn't even muster a modicum of dignity for the Chagossians. Was there a referendum? No. Did Chagossians get a say? Not a chance. They couldn't even manage a formal consultation process. And don't think the Tories walk away from this clean either. James Cleverly, the Conservative former Foreign Secretary, started this process, playing lapdog to the left-leaning judges at The Hague under pressure from the same anti-British international lawfare mob that seems to be dictating Britain's foreign policy. And it seems to me, and probably many of you at home as well, gone are the days of leaders like Churchill and Thatcher, leaders who would have sent the battleships in to defend our sovereignty and stuck a middle finger up to faceless bureaucrats. Today, we're governed by something more like a feeble French bureaucracy, waving white flags, surrendering territory, only to impress the hard-left global commentariat. Anyway, let's get the thoughts of my panel. Former Conservative MP Anna Firth, entrepreneur and podcast host Rob Moore, former Labour advisor Matthew Larzer. Guys, thanks for joining me. This is a big deal. A lot of people, Matthew, are outraged that the government would surrender such a critical sovereign territory for Britain. We are paying $10 billion over the course of, the next century for this. That could have funded 66,000 new social council houses for Angela Rayner's massive target. We could have funded 18 major hospitals with that money. Is this really the priority of the government?
Well, I don't agree that in any way it's a surrender. I think it's quite the reverse. The problem was, if I was to say to you, what happened if the radio spectrum was jammed across the Chagos Islands so that the Diego Garcia military base didn't work? What if the territorial waters were declared unilaterally not to be part, not to have any British access to them because they were given back to Mauritius? That's what would have been the consequences of the court judgment. We can't change that. I mean, there was an argument. Clearly were the fact that we were there is part of of our imperial past, which is we've been unwrapping over the past 60 years. And what the deal does today,
so it is
secures the future. Well, I mean, it's not decolonisation like somebody decolonising the National Gallery or something. The sort of things that columnists rage about. I mean, it's literally, the fact is the UN court, which was an initial judgment, said that this was an illegal occupation. What that means is we can ignore it if we wanted to, but then if it started to be enforced, it would have meant that we couldn't have used the waters around it, that the radio spectrum would have been jammed and the military base wouldn't have been operational.
I think some of those accusations on the radio sphere were actually debunked in the end, but I understand where you're coming from. Anna, of course, this started at the Conservative government. Do you think James Cleverly should have just said, I'm not listening to this? Because it was advisory, right? It wasn't. They weren't being forced to at the time. Should he just have got on with the job and said, no, we're not paying attention to this nonsense?
Well, you've had him actually on not your show, but you've had him on this channel actually today.
Yep.
And he's been asked that question. And my understanding is that he has said that he did look at this, but he decided this was not a deal in the British interests, in the UK taxpayers' interests, and therefore he was not prepared to look at it. David Cameron was not prepared to look at it. Grant Shapps was not prepared to look at it. But what's the key thing here is that the Chagos Islands have been British sovereign territory for over 200 years.
Since before Mauritius was an independent country.
Exactly. They've never been Mauritian. And what doesn't make sense at all is if this base is so critical, which I assume it absolutely is, then why on earth would we be giving it away? That's point number one.
We're keeping the base.
And that's point number one.
That's the point.
And I'll just carry on, if I may, without being...
Well, Anna, sometimes you need the facts correcting, because we're not giving the base away.
Let's just get back to the...
You just make it up.
We're leasing it back.
Yes, but we're keeping it. We're keeping the base.
Let's let Anna finish.
Thank you, Alex. The point that I want to make here, which I think is absolutely critical, this was an advisory judgment. Now, if this base is so important for our defence and, of course, for the US, then that we would have been challenging that in court. There's only Starmer, only a North London lefty lawyer would actually
backed by Donald Trump, that well-known North London lefty lawyer,
to pay to give something away that already belongs to us.
Yeah. So look, those women today were fantastic. I thought that the fact that they managed, it's a bit of a David and Goliath story. We love to see that, don't we? But
well, the people had no vote, did they?
Well, this is it.
They had no vote.
The Chagossians didn't get a say, and the Labour Party they breathe on about we're the champion of human rights, we're the champions of democracy, we're the champions of the little people, and this really has shown them up today, don't you think?
Well, the people had no vote. How would we feel if we had no vote? Look, it seems to have been not that bad for 200 years, and now all of a sudden we really need to do this deal and give this country away. It doesn't stack up for me.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anybody else other than Labour who could give something away and we have to then pay £100-odd million a year, which they say is 10 billion over the next 99 years. Nigel Farage reckons it'll be 52 billion. It won't be what they say. It'll be a load more. And who pays for it? The taxpayer. We've already got problems in this country around tax.
Well, as an entrepreneur, what would you spend the country should spend the money on? What do you think we should do?
Well, I think we need to get people back to work. for sure. I think we need to stop exiling all the people that are paying most of the tax, like the millionaires and the billionaires, and we need to focus on getting economic growth, which they say they are, but we're not getting any economic growth.
I mean, excuse me, Rob, but just following on from that point, you said yourself, Alex, all the different things that we could spend that money on, and one of the things that I looked up, even on the Conservative figures of £10 billion, that's 3,000 extra nurses or police officers we could have every single year of that 100 years. I think most people would want more nurses, more hospitals, more policemen, and keep the Chagos Islands in our own sovereign control.
And have it. Matthew, just let me ask you.
That was not an option, Anna.
OK, but let's have a look.
You live in a dream world.
That's a big cost, right? That's a big
cost.
Of
course it is, and I know how it makes people feel.
There's a lot of people who argue we didn't have to do this deal. The government is facing its own new black hole because of borrowing. We're talking about potentially raising taxes again. We're seeing all those leaks coming out now that obviously the government's having to consider it. Probably are. People will be scratching their heads. People will be scratching their heads, Matthew. You know, is this a bad deal at a bad time?
Look, I know how it makes people feel uncomfortable because, of course, paying for something we've had for free for 200 years, of course, makes all of us feel uncomfortable. If we could have kept it for free, we'd have kept it for free. It wasn't an option.
And saying that James Cleverly would have kept it for free.
That's weird because James Cleverly said in the House of Commons in 2022 when he wasn't interested in being leader of the Tory party in quite the way that he is now, as Calamity Kemi continues to fail and there'll be a vacancy soon. The UK and Anna says told me she voted for him at some stage in the leadership contest. The UK and Mauritius have agreed to engage in constructive negotiations with a view to achieving an agreement by early next year, which is in 2022. The status quo was not an option. The country was it was already been declared in an initial judgment illegal. It was going to be declared in the next judgment illegal as well. Therefore, action would have been taken, and the future of the base, which is hugely important to our national security. Of course, it's annoying to give the money away, but we need to secure the base. And instead, the Tories would have given the base. The Tories would have given the base away.
Briefly, 100 million a year is not annoying.
Do you want the base or not? Do you think it should carry on or not? Because the status quo wasn't... Yes, but the world has changed in 200 years, my friend. The world has changed.
Are we going to give away Falklands, Gibraltar, the whole empire?
Should we still have the empire? I mean, it's just crackers.
Our radio listeners are going to be tuning off en masse at the moment.
This completes the week, doesn't it? Starmer gave away our fishing rights on Monday.
Same as Boris Johnson did.
Opened the door to free movement. And now, at the end of the week, he's giving away our sovereign territory. He doesn't care about this country. He's a lefty lawyer. He's intimidated by these...
Are you going to join Reform, Anna? I'm just interested.
The rhetoric today was disgusting. To anyone who disagrees with his deal, is a Russian sympathiser, is an Ayatollah...
Anna, you either have a deal or you don't have a base. That's the reality of the world. That's called geopolitics, not the world of Tory fantasy, which is why the Tory party... I predicted last week the Tory party...
Anna, I'm putting you two on time out because I want to hear from Rob. Rob, listen, a lot of people today will be looking at the state of the United Kingdom going, Northern Ireland is in a very precarious situation. It sits in between the EU and Britain in some weird ways. We've had the EU talk about Gibraltar. There's some sort of thing happening with that. Of course, when decolonization is mentioned in these documents, people start to wonder, is the Falkland Islands next? Is Gibraltar next? What do you think when you hear people say things like that?
Well, it feels like we're just going to give it all away. Everything we've built over 200 years, we're just going to give it all away. And what is Great Britain now? What are our cultural values? What do we stand for? And decolonisation, no, that was what the British Empire was. And we were attracting all this great wealth, and now that's all gone. We attract all the Russian billionaires, and then we send them all away. We send everyone away except all the immigrants to come in. What is Great Britain now?
Matthew, just on that point I just made there very briefly, because we've got to go to a break in a second. What do you make of people who are saying we are giving up our country en masse and we're probably paying for the sacrifice?
We've secured an absolutely vital military base, which common sense, like with James Cleverly...
We already owned it.
Which we already owned.
Let Matthew finish, because we've got to wrap up.
Anna, because neither of you seem to understand geopolitics, which is the fact the thing was about to be declared illegal. You might like it to be different, but that's the reality, as Donald Trump acknowledges.
Matthew here to explain it to us.
Well, you don't understand it, Anna, so I'm glad I am here.
Switch the mics off, right? No, it's great. Thank you, guys.